Hi, I'm Elise, the Writing Center Director.
And I'm Brianna Bouillon, the Teaching and Learning Librarian.
Now let's talk about ways to incorporate citations in your text. Adding a citation at the end of your paragraph, quote, summary, or fact is often not enough to properly introduce your source. You also want to make sure the audience understands who the author is, why you're citing him or her, and where your voice ends or begins in relation to the source. Michael states that when science moves faster than moral understanding, as it does today, men and women struggle to articulate their unease. However, it's possible to argue that we do understand these issues. This is particularly true since this article was published in 2004. Michael talks about concerns related to genetic engineering, which could lead to a new type of hyperagency. But couldn't we say that we appreciate genetic engineering more than we did in 2004? Michael Sandel, a professor of political philosophy, states that when science moves faster than moral understanding, as it does today, men and women struggle to articulate their unease. However, it's possible to argue that we do understand these issues. This is particularly true since this article was published in 2004. Sandel talks about concerns related to genetic engineering, which could lead to a new type of hyperagency. However, due to recent advancements in this field, society may be ready to pursue genetic engineering and avoid Sandel's concerns.
When you are introducing a source for the first time, it can be important to mention the author's name and affiliation. This allows the audience to immediately understand, number one, who you are citing, and number two, why you chose to cite this source. For example, if you say, according to Jane Smith, the audience will know who you have cited, but it won't be readily apparent why she is relative to the point you are making. However, if you say, according to Jane Smith, professor of economics at MIT, the audience starts to understand that this author is an authority on the source, lending credibility to your citation. From here on out, when you need to identify this source, you can simply say, Smith further argues that, and the audience will know who you are referring to.
So you've now learned how to introduce your source for the first time, and why it's important to provide credentials. But there are other aspects of incorporating a source that are important. Introducing a source also allows the audience to understand where your voice ends or begins in relation to the source. You've worked hard on your paper, so make sure we can identify and understand what you are saying. Although you can sometimes achieve this distinction by using first person, this can be unnecessary and sometimes frowned upon in certain types of writing. Avoid using I excessively so that your paper doesn't sound redundant or too casual. Check with your professor to be sure that you're allowed to use first person. Another technique is to use a transition word or phrase which illustrates a change to your own voice or to that of another source's. For example, although Smith argues X, Y, Z, it's important to note that, in this example, it's clear we're going to move the paper in a different direction from what Smith originally argued.
Another way to improve the flow of your paper is to paraphrase the content of your source instead of directly quoting it. Paraphrasing means that you are restating what the source says in your own words. This is more than just changing a few words around. See our video on paraphrasing to learn more. Our original quote,
however, technologies are not just tools. They are not just things that people use as a means to ends. They shape our world, influence our perspectives, and mediate our relationships.
An example of poor paraphrasing is,
technologies are not just items. Tools are also not just a means to an end. Tools can influence our world, shape our perspectives, and moderate our relationships.
Because you are using your own words, the tone, style, and syntax you use will be similar to that of your overall paper, seamlessly integrating the source into your own text. Better paraphrasing would be,
beyond their original intent, technologies can influence several aspects of our life. From perspectives on society to our personal relationships, tools shape us more than we know.
Sometimes, providing a lengthy quote from another source can interrupt the overall tone of your paper and may be unnecessary for conveying your argument. You could use a mix of paraphrasing and quotation to lessen abrupt changes in tone. Using our example, our direct quote from Sandler conveys his perspective while retaining the flow and tone of our writing. Remember, even paraphrases need a citation. See our video about appropriately incorporating quotes for more details.
To help you remember these techniques, you can think of it as a citation sandwich. This will allow the reader to understand who the source is and where it starts, what they are saying, and where the source ends. Who is the source and where does it start? This is the first layer of bread. What does the source say? This is the content of the sandwich. The citation is the bottom layer of bread.
This has been our video on incorporating citations into your paper. For more information, see our other videos on the Writing Center website.